Hello and welcome. My name's Josie Currie and I'm a Year 11 high school student at the Riverina Anglican College in Wagga Wagga, Australia. This is a series of brief interviews with some of the most significant leaders in STEM from around the world, and they're all amazing women. I'm passionate about science, technology, engineering, mathematics and medicine, or STEM as we say now, and I will pursue a career in STEM. So I'm honoured to be able to ask a few questions of some inspirational women in STEM. I really want to thank them all for generously taking the time to chat and, importantly, pass on their rich insights. Hopefully, other young women with an aptitude for STEM can take inspiration and guidance from their experience and insights. The role of these interviews is to inspire the next generation of women in STEM. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Mitra Safavi-Naeini. Dr. Safavi-Naeini is a senior physicist and research lead in human health at ANSTO and is a faculty member in the Centre for Medical Radiation Physics in the Faculty of Engineering and Information Sciences at the University of Wollongong. She graduated at the University of Toronto with a bachelor's degree in engineering and later completed a PhD in medical physics at the University of Wollongong. She has been awarded numerous excellence awards at ANSTO and was a Prime Minister's Science Award finalist in 2018. Mitra is an international leader in the field of particle physics and medical radiation physics. Her two main research areas are radiation therapy using proton and heavy ion therapy, brachytherapy, and proton therapy, and in medical imaging quantification. She has a strong track record in research and development in medical radiation physics and engineering, and is an expert in using analytical and Monte Carlo simulation techniques to solve medical physics problems. Mitra is one of the co-inventors of neutron capture enhanced particle therapy, or NCEPT. Thank you, Dr. Safavi-Naeini, for taking the time to chat today. What drew you to a career in engineering and science, and what excited you about the nexus between the two?
Well, I usually I start by saying that it's a little bit of an inherited condition, I'm afraid, right? So I grew up in a family that mainly have careers in science, and there are a number of successful female and male scientists that are in my family. To be more specific, my mother is a political scientist, my aunt's a mathematician, and she is very well-renowned in cryptography. And then in terms of the social activism, my great aunt was a senator post-emancipation of women in Iran. So I've been surrounded with female engineers, doctors, and politicians. So I think not being led into that career would have been a little bit strange. But the other thing is that I think inherently speaking, for me, I've always had this inherent curiosity about how things work, why do they work. I love solving puzzles. And I almost have to sometimes lock myself in a room because if I walk past and I see a door opening, I would ask, why is the door opening in that way, right? So I'm always sort of preternaturally curious about things. The last thing that I could think of when I was reading your question was around the stories that I was told when I was growing up. So there was a story that I was told by my father about Ada Lovelace. So you probably know about her, but she was Lord Byron's daughter. And her mother tried to prevent the manifestation of her manic inheritance by pushing her towards maths. And she went on to be the only person who recognized the potential of Babbage's differential machine and wrote the first computer program. And then on the other side, to appreciate data science, I think, now looking back at it, I was introduced to Florence Nightingale, and everyone thinks about her as a lovely nurse that is walking along the corridors of a hospital with a lamp. But what is less known about her is the fact that she was the first female member of the Statistical Society. And she used pie charts to illustrate that the main cause of death of soldiers on battlefields were not from infections, but the recovery that was done in the hospital, and how she kind of demonstrated the importance of hygiene. So it's an early example of the data-driven policymaking. So for me, science was around that identification of potentials, exploration, curiosity. And then engineering was a mission-driven, okay, so how are we going to do it? And the last thing that I made a note to tell you was around the fact that my dad used to joke that physics, physics is theoretical engineering and maths is theoretical physics. So he was very firmly focused on the fact that electrical engineering is all and all. So Tesla is an electrical engineer, and he pushed us to study that. So for me, it was like a convergence, a convergence of the two fields, that physics and engineering both match. It's all about data processing, signal processing, and finding those key signatures.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How would you describe your journey to a career in science and engineering? Was it a direct path from high school to university and a career, or was it less direct?
Again, that was a question that made me really think. So thanks for asking it. I think macroscopically speaking, it's been fairly straightforward and direct. So and in fact, maybe a little bit more focused than what it was for most students, because early on, from year 6, I went into this gifted student program. And then when I was in year 10, I think, we kind of, we sat for some exams, and I was put into an accelerated program around physics towards the physics Olympiad. So it became fairly focused really quickly, but and as I said, I chose electrical engineering, but as my undergrad degree. But when I was at university, I actually had this moment that I had to question myself: that is it something that I'm encouraged because of this sort of strong influence of the family, or is it something that I want to do? So I did another degree in creative arts painting while I was at university doing my undergraduate at the University of Toronto. And after finishing that, again, once you finish, similar to Australia, when you finish with honors, in Canada, when we finish our degree with honors, or in my case was engineering science, so it was a fairly select group of people that finished this degree, we sit for interviews with universities in the United States. And the direct path for me would have been to do a PhD, but I wanted to go into industry. So I did an internship with Google, and then I went and worked at Philips for a year in Europe. So I guess those are the instances that I think I kind of deviated from a fairly straightforward path, especially if I compare myself to my sister, who went straight to physics, did a PhD in theoretical physics, and now works in quantum computing. But maybe if you step back, it's not that much divergence from that path of going from a fairly science-focused approach in high school to university, and then where I am now.
Yeah, my brother Hugo just started studying physics and engineering at university.
So that's,
yeah.
Again, you think that there's a little bit of a determinism from family, but I think it's a clear example of we become what we see, and it's important to have role models.
Yeah. You have a diverse range of research that reflects the importance of physics and engineering in health. For the average high school student, can you explain Monte Carlo simulation and why it's so important to research?
I think as I'm getting older, I'm getting more and more excited about the history of science. So, and I'm definitely driving my daughter crazy a little bit. She's 8, and I like, let me tell you about how it was actually found. But the whole Monte Carlo method is actually quite interesting. So closed form solutions in general are quite nice, right? So if we can get our observations to fit a nice, tight mathematical model, it's the holy grail, right? But sometimes we need to make a lot of observations to see where a particular trend is going to, is it going to converge, and where is it going to converge? And then can it be explained by a model? So in this particular instance, this was proposed by a guy during the Second World War. So Los Alamos Project, the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, Stan Ulam, I think he was sick at the hospital and he relaxed playing solitaire. And he wanted to find a way of figuring out with a deck of cards or how it lays it, does it actually have a solution? And he couldn't converge on that closed loop or closed form solution. So he figured that he should just play it over and over and over. So to speak, seeing where the dice would fall. So that's effectively, when we talk about Monte Carlo, I sometimes think we are a little bit lazy, and I speak like that to my students or to my postdocs. And I'm like, guys, we should try and see if we can come up with a closed form solution or an analytic solution. But if we can't, then Monte Carlo is a good way of doing things. So you make a lot of observations, not on the same process, but starting with multiple things. So imagine if you have multiple people throwing a set of dice and see where it would end or converge in terms of a particular outcome that you're craving or you're trying to figure out the likelihood of it. If you do it over and over, increase the frequency of it, then you hopefully can figure out what is the probability of that particular outcome to happen. And the reason why it was called Monte Carlo is, as I said, this guy was keen on solitaire and also I think was a poker player. And during those times, Monte Carlo was the place to go and lose your money. So he named it Monte Carlo, and rest is history. And now we use it in particle physics, anything that involves decay and radiation, because one decay is independent of the next one. So it's a perfect example of where Monte Carlo systems are applicable.
Yeah, sounds really versatile for problem solving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You developed NSET, which is a kind of particle therapy enhanced by neuron capture. Can you first explain particle therapy and proton therapy, and then specifically outline how NSET takes it to the next level?
Sure. So I have been using a war analogy a lot, and I think given the current climate, what's happening, the unfortunate events that are taking place in Europe, maybe we should step aside from that. So I'm going to take a leaf out of Doctor Who's book. So I don't know if you are a fan of Doctor Who or if your friends are, but he was one of the reasons that I wanted to become an engineer, because I loved his sonic screwdriver. And I was always thinking, I can make one. Not that I could. But the thing about the sonic screwdriver is that you point it, and it didn't matter what was in front of what he wanted to unlock, but it would unlock. So the holy grail of radiation therapy, or any form of therapy that you want to eliminate something, is to try and impart maximum impact where your target is and spare everything else, right? So that's what we do with radiation. We try to focus it and make it deposit most of its energy, so that punch is going to go to the target. The closest we come in terms of the external source of radiation to that is the use of particles. So heavy charged particles. So these are nuclei of atoms. So when we talk about protons, it's the nucleus of a hydrogen atom, and then you move all the way to carbon and oxygen. And I challenge anyone to see this, and sorry about that. I challenge anyone to see this and not fall in love with it, because it's just beautiful. You see, especially when you look at the energy deposition, you see these red, like usually we use the jet color. So we see these hotspots that we can create, and then there's nothing behind it. So it really does stop where we want it to stop. And we can bend the beam using magnets, so we can paint the tumor beautifully. So it is as close as we come to having that sonic screwdriver. There are challenges in producing the beam and also getting it to the energy that we want. So that is where, for instance, Australia is moving towards that. We are having that proton therapy facility hopefully coming online in 2024 in Adelaide. But at the end of the day, it's the knife of physics without opening up the patient. So in 2017, I think, I was working at that point with my PhD student. Now he's our postdoc fellow. And we were doing this classification of what happens. So if you can imagine, smashing muffins or cookies against each other, you get crumbs. So in this instance, you're starting with a nucleus, right? So nuclei are made of protons and neutrons. Your body is made of atoms, so electrons are tiny compared to the rest of the atoms. So things, if they smash, it's nucleus-nucleus interactions. And sometimes things bounce, but most of the times they actually fall apart. So we wanted to see what is produced. And we came across this neutron field inside the body. So the best way to describe it is almost like as if you have a tiny nuclear reactor inside the body that it creates this shower of neutrons. Now, that's really cool. Not only it's there, but everyone knows it's there, and people pretend that it's not there. So, you know, okay, so we thought, what can we do with it? And to also add another layer to it, at the beginning, I didn't like it because I wanted to use the nuclides that lose the neutrons and become positron emitters. So they sort of become rich in protons and they're wobbling around, and then they sort of eject a positron that is an antimatter. So that meets an electron and get these annihilation photons that go in opposite directions. I wanted to use that to see where the beam stops. So for me, it was my way of saying, with great power comes great responsibility, and I want to see where I am giving this massive punch to the tumor. But then we said, okay, we started looking at these neutrons, and I thought maybe we can talk about radioactive beams, but it's difficult to produce. And then we started looking at where this neutron field is. We saw that it's kind of around the tumor, but it goes way beyond. And clearly, because particle therapy has been used, you know, for decades now, patients survive. So it's not going to have, it hasn't had much of an impact in the survival of the patient. So we thought that what we can do with this neutron field is to recapture it, reuse it, recycle it, and give a second punch to the tumors. But the utility that excites me the most is the fact that because this neutron field is kind of like a halo and extends beyond the tumor, it gives me a mechanism to go and treat the cells or these micrometastases, those rogue cancer cells that have permeated the area surrounding the tumor, and we can't just directly hit it with the beam because we don't see it or because it's potentially gone and involved an organ at risk. So it kind of gives us, hopefully when you get to university, you would use this package. Don't ever use Microsoft Word, use LaTeX for writing your articles. There's a philosophy in computer science that we say, what you want is what you get, as opposed to what you see is what you get. I think with radiation therapy, sometimes when it's outside or external radiation therapy, we visualize the cancer and then we treat what we can see. But I think with NCEPT, it gives us another layer of being able to treat what we want, not just what we see.
Yeah, sounds like that's the best cancer treatment landscape.
Now be careful there, because again, that's another thing that I learned very early on in my career, that if anyone comes to you and says, I have a treatment for cancer, just shut up the door, right? Because they are not telling you the truth. Cancer is, and I'm a physicist, so I've been very lucky to work with biologists and chemists and medical doctors that have shown me this, but cancer changes its manifestation in our body, right? So in one person's body, the cancer moves and changes and becomes different. It expresses different phenotypes, etc. So I think and also again, when we talk about things in the hospital, it's not just what we can do; it's what benefit we give to the patient and how much we have to change things for the treatment, the treating team. So I think, well, I mean, obviously I'm super biased. I love this idea. I think where it would have its maximum impact is where currently there are no solutions for that patient. So for very specific types of cancer where it's deeply seated, where it's metastasized, where current treatments cannot have any benefits, then I think it would be a good solution. But I don't want people to think that, they have to go straight to this, because it's almost like, I don't know, trying to do a very exquisite operation when you can solve the problem with Panadol. If what you currently have does a good job and you extend the patient's life and you don't put too much burden on their loved ones, then we would use that.
Yeah, cool. You led a few teams in international hackathons in 2020. That must have been fun and challenging during COVID.
It was. What how my work is referred to by many people is it's a suitcase science, right? So the facilities that I use do not exist in Australia, or currently do not exist in Australia. Hopefully it would come. I have this number that whenever I get a chance to speak to a policymaker, a politician, I tell them that, you know, for a multi-ion therapy facility, you need $500 million. And that is the amount that in the United States people spend on outfits for their dogs every Halloween, right? So in the context of things, that is not a lot of money, but we still don't have it in Australia. So when COVID hit, I actually remember it very distinctly because I came back from Japan on, I think, 11th of February 2020, and the borders shut the 20th or 24th of February, and we haven't managed to get travel. So and we had just started getting funding to scale up our work, and I started knitting. And then I decided that that's not the best way of, I mean, it's a great thing, by the way. Knitting is like programming, you know, knots and purling is like zeros and ones in programming. And then you have subroutines, so it's brilliant. But I decided that, okay, I can do something else. So these opportunities came up with the hackathons that we started with the Australian Mathematical Society, Computer Society. Then there was one that ran between the Australian and New Zealand Defence Force. And then the last one was hosted by NASA. And they were all around the use of their existing technologies to solve a problem that was directly or indirectly created by COVID. And that was exciting for me because it actually gave me a way of almost a relief for my brain, because often we are working in an area that we don't know what the end point is. With science, when people talk about mission-based science, I usually laugh inside because science has no mission. Mission has a success or failure. And in science, you don't have success or failure. In science, it's all about exploration and to an extent, falsification of hypotheses. So for me, it's not really, it doesn't have a mission per se, whereas, you know, landing a rover on Mars, that's a mission. You know, you either land it or not. But once you get on Mars and you start looking for things, if you don't find anything, well, great. You've just extended that our understanding of things on Mars further. So these hackathons were great because we had an endpoint. We knew what success or failure was. So for me, it was a very clear, okay, it's intense. I need to work with people that prior to COVID, I didn't know them. We were sort of each in different places, but it allowed me to practice that sort of engineering muscle of mine, and also work to a deadline that I sometimes renegotiate. But here, clearly, it wasn't negotiable. It was good. And out of that, we've had now a project that has been picked up by the Australian Defence. And I'm working now with the Australian Space Agency and SmartSat CRC around this idea of distributed meshed galaxy type networks with pseudo satellites, and then create some redundancy in their program. So it was good. It had some value. I think I had fun at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's good to see people making the best out of a bad situation like COVID.
Exactly. When life gives you lemon, make limoncello out of it after you reach that legal age that you can make limoncello. Before that, it's lemonade, but not really nice.
There's been some progress in terms of gender equity in the professional sciences, including medicine, health, engineering, and agriculture. Process has been slower in the traditional or hard sciences like physics. What are your observations with respect to gender balance in STEM?
That's again a very good question, and it's one of those. Okay, so I have many opinions on this, and I think part of the reason. Okay, so there's it's a multi-generational systemic bias, right? So I think, in a nutshell, that is my opinion. So I think in general, this sort of topical approach to set targets without addressing what is causing the problem is a little bit of a corporate laundering. I don't think it's the right approach. I think setting targets like, saying we want 40-40-20 by 2025, if you haven't set those foundations 20 years ago, is unachievable, right? So that, I think, so that would be my first observation. My second observation is that I think there's some compounding effects that we sort of tend to maybe try to look at some correlating facts and think one actually causes the other one, and often that is not the case. So sort of understanding those factors is very important. And to be perfectly frank, and this is something that it came to me actually, I was really angry this International Women's Day or week, or whatever it is. I found two things were lacking. One is that why it is that we're trying to reach diversity. Why is diversity equity important, right? So we keep talking about it, and it's not just because you want to have a nice picture that everyone's there and you have one of each kind. Talking about why we're pushing, looking at, if you're talking to scientists, looking at metrics. So happiness indices, for instance, in countries that we do have that gender balance, changing the language when we're talking about childcare, for instance, and in the federal budget, it goes in funding that is going towards support for women. Why is childcare support for women? It's support for families, right? So really making those changes. And then for women that are my age, I'm turning 42 this year. So for women like me, and then also people that are already at the university sort of level, coming up with toolboxes that, okay, so there are these, first of all, calling it as it is. So don't pretend that we are colorblind or gender blind. No, we are not. These biases exist, calling them out, and then say, okay, so to combat them, these are these tools that you can use, and they're at your disposal. And the last thing that I can say, and I know that I sound like an angry person, but I think it's okay to be angry in this instance, is the fact that I'm not the problem. So expecting women to be the spokesperson and talk about it is fine. But if I haven't caused it, I don't want to be the only person that is expected to talk about it. We need to have mechanisms that if I'm not in a room, the same conversations are had, that people are held to the same standards. I shouldn't be calling people out. People should be aware of the problems. So I think raising awareness, talking about compounding factors, putting those toolboxes in place, and hoping that by the time my daughter, who's 8 now, reaches university or gets to the workforce and hopefully works at ANSTO, then we don't need any more committees, gender diversity or equity or inclusion, that these problems have been resolved.
Yeah, that's really important to learn from, I think. During your career, have you encountered barriers or challenges that were gender-based? And if so, how did you navigate those?
That's also a very good question. So again, I think maybe because whilst you're in the system, you're not aware of the problems. But also, I tell people that I think every time, I think because of my name and the way I look, people think that I may have experienced it differently, but I want to go on the record to say that, I am coming from a fairly privileged socioeconomic background. As I keep saying, I come from an egalitarian family, so I've always had that support. So I've never actually questioned my ability to do things. It was very late in my life that I became aware of this. But that's also a testament to say that because I didn't feel it, I never felt like I didn't have a voice, right? So I think that also kind of proves the fact that if you take these biases out, then there's no difference between men and women, and how they can perform or how they would set their agenda. I would say that I probably, one of the things that my dad used to tell me, and I lost my dad last year, so that's why I refer to him as past tense or in past tense. He used to say that, the answers are in your head and you have to give birth to them. So it was painful, but sometimes, it's very, very difficult. But it was really, don't complain, go and figure it out. So I had that exercise experience very early on. And also, Another thing that I find interesting, and it goes back to that systemic bias that I'm talking about, in a system that is biased inherently, often you get women that are in positions of power that do abide by the same rules and do manifest the same poor behaviors, if there are any in the system. So again, going back to my career, I actually have suffered worse at the hands of women, a couple of women in my career. And my sort of support, or the ones that have mentored me, have been men. I've had good female mentors as well. I'm actually currently mentored by one of the chief scientists in Australia. So it's really good. I have that. But it's also important to realize that some of the problems are not really individual, that it's systemic. But yes, so I have had places that I've had to teach myself to change the way I present things. So a couple of things, and I was talking about those tools. So a couple of things that I've taught myself, and it's not very instinctive to me. I tend to speak up my mind, very open person. But one of the things that I've learned very early on, again, because I was part of a debating team, is to challenge people's statements, don't challenge them. So that usually creates that separation between people and their statements. And therefore you can criticize that, and hopefully you can avoid them becoming, taking that offensive thing up. Another thing that I've learned, it's a tool for me, but hopefully by the time you're in the workforce would not be necessary, is that sometimes assertiveness in women can come across as, well, not come across, but it's less tolerated in workplace than men. And I've been in rooms that it's been like that, right? So, and my statement, for instance, has been repeated by a male colleague, and that's been taken fine. So now, for instance, I have started by saying, okay, I may not be getting the point that you're trying to make, so would you help me understand it better? And that kind of puts the onus on me, and the other person thinks that, okay, they have to explain themselves better. And then we can kind of start to disentangle this problem. And usually then I can sort of say, okay, you see, this is the thing that I don't get. And then they realize that this is what they're not seeing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I've had to adopt some tools. The more I progress in my career, and the more I am in committees that have less and less women around the table, and I'm there because I'm the only instance of that particular person, not just because I'm a woman, but because of the group that I'm representing, I find that I have to come up with ways that I can express that opinion in a succinct and clear way, but in a way that does not, it doesn't come across as antagonistic. And last thing is that one of the things that my father used to tell me, and I'm now trying to really practice it, is that before you start talking, think about how you want to end the conversation, or how you want that other person to leave the room. So sometimes I don't say things. I'm not because they're wrong. I know I'm right, but I know that they're not going to achieve what I'm trying to do for the team. So I just, take a step back, and what is not said can always be said later. And I don't think, and to be perfectly frank with you, sometimes I think that if I wear, because I compare it to how my husband speaks in meetings, and I don't think my husband has these things on his mind when he talks. So yeah, those are the differences, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's a really important to keep in mind. As a woman, do you feel pressure to trade off career versus family? And do you think gender plays a part in work-life balance?
It's an interesting question again. And again, I was, so in the third movement of feminism, we were sort of taught that, or my mother taught me that, you can do everything, you can have everything. I think, and fourth movement of feminism is now focusing on that storytelling. So I hope in the fifth movement of feminism, that I'm sure you will be leading, is going to hopefully be around the fact that it's not going to, you can't have everything. Identify the things that you can drop, prioritize. So it's like juggling balls. So if you can drop something and it bounces back and it doesn't break, then okay, that's fine. Just don't drop the ones that would break. Can't say them. So for me, I guess that the turning point was when I decided to have a child, because prior to that, I never felt like I was, I had to compromise things for another person. But whilst, again, I'm in a relationship that it's modeled after something that I know, so it's super egalitarian, but just the notion of the fact that I was a young mother, breastfeeding my daughter, trying to balance it with the responsibilities that I had as a postdoctoral fellow was a little bit challenging and stressful. So I conducted some experiments at the Australian Synchrotron while I was breastfeeding my daughter. So she was 9 months old, and I would run back and forth to feed her and do experiments. And my male colleagues clearly didn't have to worry about that. So there is a lot of pressure, but I did this, and I don't recommend anyone should do it, but I did this because I had seen one of my very good friends, Susanna Guatelli, who is an associate professor at the University of Wollongong. She applied for an ARC grant, and one of the comments from the referees was that, but you're a young mother, how are you proposing to put these number of hours into your work? And I don't recall this question ever being asked from a man. Yeah. And nobody actually asks the guy, how many children do you have, right? So I decided at that point when I saw this that I didn't want to ever have to say that I've had a career break. Again, it was a decision that I made. It means that I'm accepting the fact that there are inequalities in the society, but it put a huge amount of pressure on me, and it took me about 7 years probably to get over it, just to recover from the lack of sleep. But what that taught me at the same time is that I can operate on very little sleep. So when you're in particle physics, especially, sort of research in that area, we often work in environments that are operated as a hospital during the day. So they don't let us in those rooms. We have to use the graveyard shifts, right? Nighttime. I'm fine. So I can run 5 nights, very little sleep and run. And then my male colleagues, you can see that they start growing their beards and the answers become monosyllabic. So I'm usually giving them sugar and chocolate. And I'm quite fine. And I start mixing my languages because I'm trilingual. So I speak French, Farsi, and English. So these things get mixed up. But apart from that, I can operate okay. So that's, I guess, a very minor superpower that you discovered, or I discovered about myself.
Yeah. Do you think there is a role or responsibility for successful women in STEM to mentor and sponsor women starting their careers?
Absolutely. I think as I keep saying, I'm an example, and you mentioned your brother, and I'm sure you're also interested in STEM because you're asking me these questions. I think we become what we see, right? So, and again, that is why I didn't say no when they asked me, can you speak to people? Because I think it's important for people to see that, she looks like me, she has a weird accent, but she's still, doing this and continuing to work. So I think, but I do acknowledge my privilege, right? Because I think it's important for people to know that I've had a lot of support. I don't want people to think that it's easy, but yes, role models are very important. Sometimes workshopping things are very important. So personally, I have requested one of our female executives at ANSTO to be my mentor at ANSTO. And I also have a mentor in Victoria. He used to be chief scientist in Victoria, and she mentors me around those sort of policymaking science-based questions. And she sits at that nexus of industry, translation, and research. Whereas with my mentor at ANSTO, I workshop how I can sometimes address the politics within the organization, and also at a broader level. Politics are everywhere. So, and she was actually the one who taught me, sometimes just changing the way you start the conversation sets you in the right state. So yes, I think mentorship is important. I think everyone has, it's very rewarding if you can mentor someone. And I've also relied on people to mentor me.
Yeah, 100% agree. Is there anything around diversity or gender equity in engineering and physics that's important or contentious you'd like to see the next generation resolve?
Yes. I'm giving you the baton. I think evidence-led policies, right? So I use an example from marketing that, if there's a company that tries to hit those sales targets, they don't hold an international day of marketing or an international week of sales. They don't also invite a guru to come and talk about their journey in life. It's almost a logical fallacy to expect others to be able to emulate your life. You're unique. Your experiences in life is unique. And also we have this coherence bias, looking back and thinking, oh, this thing that happened to me in childhood has led me here. It's almost like it's post facto narrative building, right? So I think I would like if we could, and I think for me, it's probably, I don't know if I could do it, but I think for you guys, it's very important to speak about, okay, so really having that science-based approach, that we would take to sales. Okay, so what are our sales targets? Are they reasonable given the resources that we have inside the organization or outside, globally? Are they achievable, these goals that we're setting? What are the current mechanisms at place or what are the current policies? How are we going to evaluate their efficacy? And we have to keep reevaluating it, right? So close the loop. This is sort of a feedback loop. So close that loop, evaluate the efficacy of your policies, and if they don't work, change them, and then reevaluate. So same thing that we do for, as I said, addressing sales, we can do it with gender equity. Maybe, as I said, I think when I was growing up, there was a tendency to sort of say, oh, but I'm colorblind. I don't see the difference. No, colors exist. In animals, we see that they're more attracted towards certain what they recognize. Smells, for them could be different, not the shape. In humans, it's the same. So they recognize those biases, admit them, and then find ways to mitigate. It's like we can be short-sighted, but we wear glasses. We don't deny that people are short-sighted or myopic. We have tools to mitigate that. So the same thing should be applied to other things. And what else? And I guess the last thing is to maybe share the onus of responsibility. If you're not the problem, you're not the only responsible party. You can speak up from experience, but I don't know how it is from where you're seeing it in your school, but at my level, at gender equity committees, 99% of people that are there are women. Now, women are not the problem. We need to have people that are part of the problem to first be made aware and then become champions for change.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Are there any experiences from your journey that might inspire the next generation of women? Oh, did I just ask that one?
Yes. I mean, okay, so usually I tell people, why don't you want to be a scientist, right? Because you're getting paid to think. It's a privilege to be a physicist, and I should be a bit less biased and say be a scientist, right? Because we are given all these instruments, laboratories, complicated and expensive machines, and usually as scientists, you're not asked to make money out of it, right? So they give us money to spend. We obviously have to make it sustainable, so don't operate at a loss, but you're not really expected to make profits. So in return, what we're expected to do is to think and to solve puzzles. And I think that's super rewarding. So I think I usually tell people that, if you enjoy solving puzzles, then science is for you. And children are born scientists, so I don't see why anyone would not want to be a scientist. From personal experience, every time I never studied chemistry as such at school, and I had this, now I feel really ripped off, but I used to say that chemistry is all about exchange of electrons, so why do I want to do chemistry? It's trivial. And then when we got to organic chemistry and they were talking about chirality, then I thought that it's just bonkers. So no way I'm going to study it. And now I'm looking at, and I was talking to one of my colleagues who's a fabulous synthetic chemist, and he was telling me about, how all life is left-handed. So all amino acids are L-shaped. And he was telling me, what, or L-type. And then we're talking about how all sugars are S. So then you think about life and you start thinking about, so what has caused this? How would it have been had it not been like this? And it becomes almost, again, like a science fiction, exciting. So if people like to think about, the lost continent of Atlantis, then read about the temperature of a black hole or the Standard Model. And these are a lot more exciting. So yes, I think learning, the opportunity to learn every day, the opportunity to speak to people that are passionate about their work and learn from them. I wouldn't have been afforded this had it not been for me being a scientist and working at a science organization.
Yeah, it's a really important perspective. For young women, what are essential skills you think they need to craft and navigate a career in STEM?
Okay, so I want to start by saying that I think women are super tenacious and resilient, right? So there's no real physiological or anatomical reason why we should not have equal representation. It's also societal. So there's a very famous case that relates brain size to cognition. This was debunked when someone pointed out that whales actually, whales that sit in the ocean, they have the largest brains amongst mammals. So then somebody said, oh, but it's the brain to skeletal ratio. But if you do that calculation, women have a higher ratio. Now, this didn't change the actual societal bias. So it actually, the fact that women have bigger brain, so, and it didn't end up giving them more leadership roles. So I find it that what I want to point out here is that we can provide more equal opportunities and expose girls to those leadership models from an early age. So again, it's not my field, so I might be quoting wrong numbers, but I think you have the sort of prefrontal cortex of the brain, so that the sort of those executive functions, they start developing around between 3 and 5, right? So before that, kids were tantrums. After that, they start developing more resilience and control over behavior. And then by when you get to those teenage years, you can actually start leading groups, right? So you can inspire people and lead. So giving women and young girls, or young women and girls, those opportunities towards leadership, I think is quite important. And then I suppose there are those more practical things. So doing the hardest level of maths that you can do, right? So, or learning how to code. My daughters started coding from a year ago. I started coding when I was 6. And again, to show my age, I did it on Commodore 64. So it's a language, right? So, and women are, well, that's what used to be said about women, that, we're all very good with languages. English programming was considered to be a secretarial job until the first society was created around programming, and then men created the society, and then they said tertiary education is a condition, so they excluded all women. But prior to that, it was considered to be a secretarial job, and women were the natural programmers. So trying everything, being afraid of, not completing. It's okay to break things. What happens if your code doesn't compile? You just reinstall your operating. Worst case is that you reinstall your operating system, right? So nothing's going to go wrong. Ask questions. Nothing is stupid. Just have that confidence to ask. to be loud, to express your opinion thoughtfully and respectfully, of course. But yeah, but I think those, it all comes down to those confidence building exercises. So I think it's important to have to push girls, give them opportunities towards those leadership roles. And I think at the end of the day, now at least explicitly, it is not okay to make any correlation between, say, skin color of a person and their ability to lead. And I think similarly, it should be the same that, you know, it's not okay to make a correlation between one's gender and one's ability to lead.
Yeah, it's really great advice. One question to finish. Do you have any other pearls or pitfalls to offer young women in high school with an aptitude for STEM?
You're so kind. I was thinking, oh, you know, pearls of wisdom. I don't consider myself that wise. In fact, today I was at 4 p.m. I think I thought I've done enough adulting for the day. I'm going to be catting for the rest of the day. I was looking at my cats. But I think, okay, so there are two things. One is that do STEM if it's really inspiring you, right? Because it's very exciting when you think about it macroscopically, but nanoscopically and microscopically can be very frustrating, especially when you're looking for something and sometimes you're not finding it, or you start with a hypothesis and you prove yourself wrong, which is, by the way, what science is about. It's about falsification of hypotheses. But and again, we can talk about the societal meaning of the whole thing, because sometimes we talk about, you know, I've been to talks that people say, oh, but pay is good. Well, that's the wrong way of looking at it, because it shouldn't be a means to an end. We have to talk about the end. If the end is to provide people with a good life, you know, I don't know, a house or a good income, then it shouldn't be through STEM. We have to have a society that provides people with that minimum. And then those that want to take a STEM career or dedicate their life to that, they will do it because they like to do it. So, but we are living in this world, unfortunately. It's a capitalistic world. And at the end of the day, there is a shortage of people with STEM qualifications. So, and I think, as we can see, for instance, and now everyone thinks that machine learning is the end all and be all, and I use it at all. I use it a lot in my work. But sometimes I work with people and I'm like, are you aware of the biases, or do you know the importance of, you know, making the right assumptions or understand the boundaries of the problem that you're trying to solve? So, but you can expect many disruptions, right? Many disruptions, many changes in the market that you're operating in the society that you're operating. I think one thing that I'm really sorry that you're seeing it this young, but you've now gone through a pandemic. You've, I'm sure, shown a lot of resilience to be able to, you know, work from your bedroom, Zooming, seeing people in 2 dimensions. You probably have missed out on some experiences that, you know, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it would have been normal for your age. We are now going through a war. It also changes things. There are lots of, you know, in the scope of big science is changing a lot of collaborations. I had a meeting with my collaborators at CERN, and they were saying how they're rewriting a lot of collaborative agreements because Russia's being taken out of the oversight committee for CERN. So that means that now a lot of those agreements or funding mechanisms have to be rewritten. So there's a lot of disruptions. You can expect a lot of changes to the assumptions that you've made about your career. But I think a career in science or in STEM in general gives you a lot of capabilities and tools in your toolbox that allows you to apply yourself to a lot of problems. My dad used to say that there are not that many things in life that you should know really, really well, but those few things that you need to know really well, you should know them really well. And he always would take me back and ask me to derive the Maxwell equations in differential form. So that was his mindset. I'm not saying you should do that, but in general, I think, yeah, so as I said, challenge yourself, take the highest level of high school maths that you can, and be ambitious. And then if STEM is what your passion lies, then it takes you quite a few unexpected places, but it can be super exciting.
Yeah, that's a really awesome way to finish. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Once again, I want to thank Dr. Safavi-Naeini for her incredible insights and for taking the time to not only speak with me, but also inspire the next generation of women in STEM.
It was a pleasure speaking with you.